Welcome to Season 3 of Under the Sisterhood, Women Making the World Healthier. We'll be featuring a series on investing in women's health, showcasing 5 powerhouse investors and venture capitalists over the next 5 weeks. Our conversations will focus on many different aspects of women's health and wellness. We'll examine women's health in general, sexual health, reproductive health, and menopause, and what it means to invest in them. This is a podcast to celebrate women and all that they do in our world. I'm Elizabeth Elfenbein. Let's get under the hood. Today, we're getting under the hood with Jessica Federer, a daughter, sister, friend, women's advocate, and investor in women's health. Jessica is a board member, big pharma executive, managing director, and investor adept at deploying technology to make meaningful advancements for both business and society. She serves on the boards of Sage Therapeutics, Pluto Health, and Angelini Ventures. She is one of the first chief digital officers for the life sciences industry, leading the global digital transformation for Bayer A.G. across the pharmaceutical, consumer care, crop science, and animal health businesses. During the pandemic, she joined Europe's fastest growing digital health company, Huma, as Managing Director, US CEO, establishing a US team and expanding into decentralized clinical trials for international COVID-19 vaccine studies. Jessica is recognized as a 2023 icon by Rock Health, one of the top 100 CDOs and a leading health tech influencer. She is the founder and chair of the New York Stock Exchange Women's Health Investor Summit, bringing together investors representing over 100 billion US dollars. She serves on the Yale Ventures Blatnick board, the Yale IRB, and previously was on the United Nations ITU Advisory Board and the BHP Technology Advisory Board. She began her public health career as an analyst at the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Jessica earned her Bachelor of Science from the George Washington University and a Master of Public Health from Yale. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you, Elizabeth.
Oh, I'm so excited. Today, we're here. It's Season 3, Women Making the World Healthier. And because of you, we have this wonderful angle, which is a series of women's VCs and women's health. And, you and all of your amazing experience and all the work you've done, it's going to be a wonderful podcast for our audience.
Thank you for making it happen.
So if it's okay, I'd love to get going.
Great.
So, Jess, we're asking everybody this question, but I think after reading your intro, it's going to be really interesting hearing your story. When did that inflection point in your life, that desire to pursue science and health and wellness happen? And if you take us on your journey.
Oh, it's such a good question. I don't think anyone has asked me that in a very long time. So I think I've always been a science nerd. And it wasn't until college when I discovered there was this category called public health that I really became excited. And I'd never heard of, you don't hear of public health when you're a teenager and you're in high school. You know your doctor and you know medicine and you generally know the healthcare system and you know a little bit about insurance. But I hadn't been exposed to the category of public health, to epidemiology and biostatistics and using data to help predict and intervene and make changes and having that hard science that is focused on a population. And so when I did discover public health in college, it was only for master's students. There were only master's degrees of public health. And, you don't know what you can't do until you try. So I went to the university and got all the signatures and rallied all the students and convinced them to start an undergraduate degree for public health. And then convinced all my fellow science nerds to come with me and be the first class. And I think from there, it just kept growing because when you really want to help people, medicine is an incredible way to do it, nursing, healthcare, and it's one-to-one, but not everybody's cut out for that one-to-one interaction. And in public health, you can use science and technology to touch, hundreds, thousands, millions of lives at a time. And it's a very compelling field.
Oh, that's wow. I'm like, wow, I'm taken aback. I want to highlight one thing. I mean, to know that, to feel that as an undergraduate student, that was missing, and then to rally around building that. First of all, tremendous leadership and vision at such a young age to make that happen. So kudos to you. So it's very intriguing. I think you're right in terms of the ability to impact so many more people with public health. I'd love to hear. So you go off, you do your master's for public health at Yale. What was that experience like, and what happened as you moved out of that from Yale?
Of course, as you advance in your studies, you often get much more immersed in the practical applications of what you're studying in the real world. And so at Yale, I was part of a team that the government hired to look at data to find ways to incentivize better care. So essentially, they were asking, what data can we use to reliably see what hospitals are giving better care than others? And going beyond that, even to efficiency of care. So putting cost into the equation. So what is the value over cost? So I was part of a team at Yale that published the first hospital efficiency measure, the 30-day all-cause heart failure readmission rate. And that was one of the early moves to say, let's see what objective data can tell us about the value over the cost, about the efficiency of the care being provided. And then let's start reporting that publicly and go even one step further and start reimbursing hospitals based on how they perform. And so that was one of the early initiatives to start looking at data for reimbursement, data to incentivize payment based on outcomes. And the field has continued to grow and evolve. But I think seeing that practical application as technology has evolved in the last decades, I mean, we've seen some incredible, if you look back the last 3 decades, we've seen some incredible technology adoption. We didn't have our Macs here and our iPhones, and we were all starting out with, you remember your beepers and your pagers. As technology advanced, the data we were able to collect advanced, and then what we were able to do with that data advanced. And so it's really been a little bit of luck to be here at a time where technology is advancing in a field, enabling more and more applications to improve lives.
Wow, that's a great answer. And I'm curious though, because you were young when you were experiencing that. So going through that and doing that sort of study, if you will, at such a young age, we tend to be, when we're younger, we think very differently than as we move along in our career and we experience things. Did you have anything, did you feel one way when you began working on that study, and now looking at it, looking back at it is like, you feel differently now? Because that's really interesting at that age.
Yeah, I think at that age, you don't know the context. Now I look back and I was part of a historic initiative, and then now there's many hospital efficiency measures, and it's a huge business of working with the data and getting reimbursed based on the data. So I think I didn't understand the significance of it at the time. The same while I was in grad school, I also joined the IRB, the Institutional Review Board. And for those of you who don't know, any research involving humans, any clinical trials involving people, must be approved by an institutional review board. And that is because you need a group to review the ethics of the study, not the scientific merit, not the statistical significance, but to review it from a human protections perspective. And see, are you explaining the risk properly? Are you explaining that the study isn't designed to benefit the person volunteering? Are you taking the right considerations to do what you can to reduce the burden of being in clinical trials, or reduce the burden of being in research for people? And I joined that IRB during grad school, and it was that experience was exceptional, because I remember, they'd ship you these protocols in a big box, printed papers, and you would read through all these protocols and highlight them and mark them up and write your questions. And then we would all gather around a table in some really unattractive room across from the Yale School of Public Health. And the group was consisted of one of the top bioethicists at Yale and a nursing advocate and a prison advocate. And we had a nun and some doctors, and just this incredible brain trust of people all coming together with the sole purpose of how are we doing everything we can to protect people and reduce the burden on them if they want to participate in advancing science. And still today, I'm on a Yale IRB. This one is focused on oncology. And of course, now everything is computerized and electronic, and the protocols come to you digitally, and we don't sit around a table with pizza and mark things up and pass papers around anymore. But it's still such a special fundamental element that hasn't changed at all. It's still people coming together with the explicit purpose of making sure we're using all of our awareness and experience and expertise to protect others and make sure that science advances in a way that is respectful and is thoughtful and is done in the best way possible.
That is a wonderful thing. And it's like a lot of people, most of us wouldn't even know that there's this ethics board, if you will, in terms of evaluating different drugs coming through. And so that's
one of the requirements of these ethics boards is to have non-scientists. So if you have listeners that are passionate about science, either in oncology or cardiology or women's health, they can go to their local university or look up the local IRBs and ask to join. Many of them are volunteers. Some of them provide a little stipend, but it's a great way to, one, stay up to date on what is the most cutting edge research, but two, be really human in science and just say, I don't understand this consent form. And if I don't understand it, somebody else isn't going to understand it. It's just a great way to participate in science for anybody who's looking for a way to be part of life sciences research without being a scientist.
I love that. And I am going to look into it. And I think it's incredible. But I think what's incredible as well, as it relates to you, Jess, is the fact that you did that at a young age. You're continuing to do it. You understand the value of it. And to have that lens into the ethics of science as it relates to humans is really amazing at a young age when you think about it, because it gives you a really human filter in something. Science is science, and so the humanities side of it's really interesting. So, all right, so we're going to move on. This is interesting. So you leave Yale. What's your first job outside of Yale? Like, what do you do in the science field, and how do you bring your public health experience to bear?
Yeah, so before I went to Yale, I deferred for a little while and took a government job in DC for the Department of Health and Human Services, and this was cool. The Medicare Modernization Act required the creation of like a blue ribbon panel, heads of unions and health systems and insurers and huge companies. And the panel was tasked with finding out what Americans want in healthcare and then reporting it to Congress. So before going to grad school, I was staffed. I worked for the Department of Health and Human Services, but they assigned me to this legislatively mandated effort. And we did hearings in all 50 states to hear what people wanted in healthcare and what it meant to them and what their priorities were. And, at the end of the day, we put out the report. We had to present it to all the Senate committees and Congress. But at the end of the day, people don't think you should lose your livelihood and your home if you get sick. And, to some extent, that's what we have in the US is there's a huge risk that if you get sick, you'll lose your job, you'll lose your insurance, and you'll lose what you have. And so that was a really helpful lens going into grad school of just having been in every 50 state, listening to what is important from a union perspective, an employer perspective, a healthcare provider perspective, a family caregiver perspective, and funneling that into, okay, now how do we appropriately reflect that in the science and data? So when I graduated from Yale, because I was on the IRB reviewing protocols, I had a nice foot in the door in the science space, and then a literal foot in the door because the Yale New Haven campus at the time was home to a Bayer campus. Bayer had a West Haven campus literally attached
I
to
actually remember that. I remember that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And of course, Bayer sold it to Yale as time went on and consolidated more in New Jersey. But I was meeting with the head of regulatory. We had a regulatory class and regulatory science class looking at how does the FDA and EMA and how do the regulators evaluate things. And as part of that, I met the head of regulatory at Bayer. And this was one of the most spectacular leaders I've had the privilege to work with. He saw I was interested in pharma, but he also saw, coming out of Yale, you can do a lot of different things. So he invited me to a lunch, and I show up at this lunch, and around the table, he has somebody representing all of the careers I could go into. So he had a head of healthcare from a top 3 world consultancy. He had a top healthcare leader from the US government. He had a top healthcare insurance. So he had these people around the table. We had this lovely lunch. And of course, he was representing Big Pharma. By the end of the lunch, as I was rushing across campus to get to my next class, I had decided I was going to go work for him, not because of what he said was so much more compelling than the others, but if that was the way he thought about the world to convince me, that was somebody I wanted to learn from. So, after that lunch, what a great way to be recruited, right? Like, here's your options, you pick, and nobody recruits like that anymore. So I went and worked for Bayer, and for this brilliant leader, and from regulatory affairs is where you're working with the government agencies to make sure the data shows a drug is safe and it works. And so it's all data focused. Somewhere around that time, a new field started called market access, where in addition to having data that shows a drug is safe and works and now you can sell it, well, you had to have data that shows, is it worth the money? Is it worth paying more than what's already there? Is it worth paying for this instead of paying for education for children? Is it worth paying for this instead of new roads? What is the health economics of the medicine? What should the pricing be? And so this new field was market access, and it was brand new at the time. We didn't have it at all in Bayer. So when they started to talk about building a new market access team, I raised my hand and convinced them to bring me onto the team and moved over to Berlin. And we built out market access across the company. Everybody in pharma is familiar with the same thing. All the companies started adopting it at the same time because government started requiring that data, particularly in places like the UK, which was a pioneer in the space, really looking at, is there data to show we should pay for this new medicine? And if there is, the data is showing us how much more we should pay for the medicine. What's the real value of this new science? And the US doesn't take that systematic approach yet. Different payers will do it differently, but in other countries, it's done at a country level. And so that required that healthcare companies adapt and build up that team and that expertise and that data knowledge. And then from market access, I moved into product launches, launching some really exciting new drugs. One of my favorites was I was on the launch team for Eylea, and Eylea is still like an $8 billion a year drug. It's a tremendous new innovation where, for me, it was personal because my grandfather lost his vision to AMD. And he loved to read and he loved to write. And he had, at the time, 60 grandchildren, and he lost his vision to this disease. And here I was at Bayer being able to bring out a new treatment for wet AMD, wet age-related macular degeneration, that effectively keeps people from losing their vision. It stops the blood vessels from leaking in the back of the eye, and you maintain your vision as you're maintaining your treatment. And so launched some amazing new products, and then worked my way through the big company, like you do every few years. A big company will move you around. They'll put you through leadership assessments and have you go to observation groups with top VPs to see how you respond to things and test you out. And they keep promoting and moving you. And my last role at Bayer was as Chief Digital Officer. And that was a new role, new for the industry and new for the company. And my remit was running digital transformation for Bayer across pharma, consumer care, crop science, and animal health. And that was what really moved the data, data to show a drug is safe, data to get it paid for, data for launches, data for organization and infrastructure and enterprise efficiency, and data in the ecosystem. Really just continued the data journey through the organization.
Well, that's really interesting. And to work across the various, I don't know if we would call it subcategories or sectors, if you will, from animal health to life sciences. What was that experience like in terms of connecting them as chief digital officer?
So fun. So, you know, when you're in a big company that's evolved over time, you buy in some companies, you acquire some assets, things are cobbled together as you grow. And where we're at today, it's a necessity to have somewhat of a fundamental consistency, uniformity across your data landscape. And if a company is 150 years old, some countries had a lot more budget, some brands had a lot more budget than others, and they invested in the early expensive stuff, which is now completely outdated and nobody can update it. And then other countries waited a while, but then they leapfrogged in tech. And at some point you had to get to a harmonization of, here's how we manage our information, here's how regulators expect it to be managed, here's the processes around it. But when it came to the differences in customer inside of a big company, the animal health team would look at the veterinarians and the pet owners or the farmers with their cows. And then, in consumer care, you'd look at the mom of the kids with allergies and, the person taking their multivitamins and their painkillers. And in pharma, you would look at the providers and prescribers. But at the end of the day, with the data, when you're connecting it, with your data partners, you can see it's often the same person who's taking one of your prescriptions and buying your multivitamins and buying your Seresto collars for their dog. It's the same person. And in crop science, even buying some of the crop science products for their gardens. So it's a different way of bringing together the data points. Instead of looking at it as 5 different people, it's one person with 5 different interactions with your company.
And that's interesting because I often talk about everybody's a consumer, they consume information differently. So in that same context, it's the one person consuming, whether they're in the mindset today, they're doctor, tomorrow they're just consuming as a mother, or, buying the material for their gardens type of thing. So I think that that's great. And thank you for that. That's really interesting. I would imagine, thinking about data because you're looking at data and then to it's almost like you've now just in a very succinct, quick way humanized it, right? It's the so
That's the goal. It's not about the tech, it's about the people.
Exactly. So you leave Bayer and what you were there for what, 10 years or so? What was your next move?
Oh, well, after we had just acquired Monsanto. It was a very big acquisition, and we'd been working on it for a long time. And my boss on the board was encouraging me. He was leaving the board and going on to do other things, and he was encouraging me to consider doing the same. He's like, "You've reached chief digital officer. You've been there a few years. And what else? Why don't you go try something else? Have some fun." And so when I left Bayer, I wanted to get into the faster moving side of things with both investors and startups. So I started in working with a VC group, investing in early stage companies, but then also started advising both the early stage companies as they were preparing for their IPOs and as they were growing, but also the large established companies, some of the world leader companies, names we all know, and how they deploy technology to make a difference in their countries and in their businesses. And so it was a really nice way to go from a world of Bayer, a world of human, animal, plant, everything is inside the company. It's very much your world is one company, to going out into such a diverse landscape of companies and seeing many of them, actually all of them, facing the same challenges from a different perspective. And so I joined some boards, did a lot of advising, got into investing. And that's really where I started to see the disparity of investment when it came to women's health. And of course, Bayer was always a leader in women's health, still is a leader in women's health. And so I'd always known about the field, but it wasn't until I was in the startup investing side, seeing how fewer women investors there are, how fewer women CEOs are getting funded, how small amount of the resources are going into women's health category diseases, and even just the complete lack of awareness that women's health is such a new field. You know this, and I'm sure your listeners know this, but it wasn't until 1993 that Congress passed an NIH Revitalization Act requiring for the first time that women and minorities be included in federally funded clinical trial research. And that was just federally funded clinical trial research. So at best, you have 30 years of data on women and minority in clinical trials. In reality, in many cases, you have a whole lot less. And so we're still struggling to include more women in clinical trials, to include more diverse populations in our studies. And this is so fundamentally important because, as we were just saying, it's not about the tech, it's about the people. And if the people aren't in your study, the data you have doesn't represent how the science is going to be realized in the real world. So if your study is all on predominantly white men, but in the real world, let's say a lot of Black women will be taking the drug, the response is going to be very different. And we finally now have an understanding that we need to start looking at data by gender. We need to analyze the data by gender, and we need to see how we can invest to prioritize this new field of women's health. And for your listeners that aren't familiar with women's health, it's much more than reproduction and menopause. It's much more than fertility and menopause. Heart disease is still the leading cause of death for women. Women die, 50% are more, they're 50% more likely to die in the year after a heart attack than men. That's ridiculous. Women are 80% of autoimmune patients in the US are women. 2/3 of Alzheimer's patients are women. Most of the GI, gastrointestinal patients are women. So the list goes on and on and on. But these are spaces where we're just starting to understand, it affects women very differently, very disproportionately. Maybe we should study that and ensure they're included in our studies and that we have them represented in our clinical trials.
And then also, just to build on that, couldn't agree more. And thank you for that, Jess. Also, the other side of it is looking at gender-specific treatment, drug for, because to your point, I mean, I know that the average patient with an autoimmune disease, it takes them 5 to 10 years to get diagnosed. And if they're 80% are women with autoimmune diseases, and they're not even looking for treatment options. They're not even, forget about clinical trials. They haven't come up with science that could solve these problems. So I think it's really interesting because there's so many ways that you can invest in women's health. We need more founders who are building solutions. To your point, not just digital, like not just medicines, all sorts of solutions that address the needs of women separate of men, because men presumably have kind of been taken care of, if you will. I don't mean that in a disparaging way, but just in a transparent way. Women's bodies are different and they need to be treated and seen differently.
And it's really a historic legacy data problem. For the longest time, women weren't included in research because of their ability to have children. And because we didn't know what would happen with new drugs and new experimental medicines, we didn't want to potentially impact a developing baby. And so, it was originally done to protect developing children, that you wouldn't include women of childbearing age in research. And then, as science advanced, we realized, okay, well, we can make sure that a woman isn't pregnant in the study, or we can take different considerations. And we really do need data to understand how women aren't just smaller men. They do have a different autoimmune response, a different inflammatory response. They metabolize drugs differently. And it's just a young field. And that's why it's so exciting when companies actually make strides in this area. You've interviewed a few amazing founders in this space. One that I'm really excited about is, maybe you saw this week, Time Magazine released their Best Inventions of 2023. And I'm so thrilled that Sage Therapeutics' new treatment for postpartum depression made the list. Because this is a best invention of 2023, maybe a best invention of the decade. But for a category where women with postpartum depression felt ignored, felt guilty, felt there was nothing available to them, to go from that to something where, hey, it's a 2-week treatment, a pill once a day. It's not you, it's the chemicals in your brain after giving birth, and we can help you, and you'll feel better, and it's okay. Call your doctor and get treatment. It's a huge shift in such a short amount of time. And since the news has come out that we're bringing this new drug to market and we have FDA approval, the amount of women and moms that have called me and said, is it available now? Can I get it now for my daughter, my sister, my friend? Can I get it now? It's just, women have been waiting for someone to validate that it's not in their head and it's not their fault. It's science, it's chemistry, and it's fixable. And that's, I'm just so proud of the Sage team for bringing out something to make a difference for these women and their entire families at such a vulnerable time.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. And it's interesting, just hearing that. I mean, women being acknowledged in all aspects of life, but I think that's a really critical time after having child, because you're so vulnerable and you don't know what you don't know because you're new at this whole experience. So, I mean, when you have your second child, when you have your third, but also you could experience each postpartum experience could be different, and so I think that's wonderful to hear. So here you are. I mean, you're doing all these amazing things in terms of investment and seeing these opportunities. And of course, you're an amazing thought leader in this space. Talk a little bit about where you are today and the things you're thinking about, Jess.
Oh, I'm thinking that for 2023, women are putting up with way too much. I mean, I know you talked to Karen Leishman, who started Okon Therapeutics, and she's on the board at Spivics. And it's this great little company out of Switzerland, but it's essentially trying to replace a device that is used on women every single day to put in an IUD. And it is a metal tool that was used 100 years ago to pull bullets out of people on the battlefield. So you're taking this old metal tool that was designed to pull bullets out of soldiers on the battlefield, and you're using it inside of women every day as part of an IUD placement. What? It's 2023. And when women complain about the pain and discomfort of having an IUD inserted, well, yeah, of course it's painful. Look at what's being used. And so this little company is Spivics, it's a painless vacuum suction approach. There's no metal, there's no bleeding. It's how it should be in 2023. It's designed for that body part. It makes so much sense. And if you think, why did it take till now? Because women just, I was talking to an investor this week at Grand Central. She was in town and she was telling me how when she had her IUD placed, it was so painful, she fainted twice. And she told the doctors, just do it the third time, even if I faint, because we're not doing it again. And she said, and I said, well, why did you put up with the pain? I didn't think there was another option. And in so many cases, I find in healthcare, women are putting up with pain and discomfort and bad treatment because they just think it's how it is. And I told her, no, well, there's this device and it can make it a lot less painful and no pain and no bleeding and shared the link with her. And she had no idea and was so excited to go tell her doctor and tell her friends. But I think we're here because women are so caring of others and accommodating. I'm generalizing vastly here, but the fact that we're in 2023 and we've been putting up with so many of these antiquated, barbaric, I would even say inhumane practices as standard of care in healthcare for women is just a little shocking. And then that also falls over into the investment. The fact that such a small, couple percent of healthcare investment is going to women's health, and yet every life on the planet comes from women's health. So it doesn't make any sense.
Mind-boggling. It's
yes.
Just the way you put that, it's beyond mind-boggling.
Why are we putting up with it? So, when I started talking to you about putting a spotlight on the women's health investors, I'm so passionate about investors that deliberately, intentionally invest in women's health. And this series you have coming up, I'm so excited about it. Alice at RH Capital has invested in some really groundbreaking women's health companies. Linda at Avestria, Jess at Coyote, Carla at Amboy. I mean, you're talking to some women who are pioneering a new space of women's health investment. And it's not easy, because to raise a fund to invest in women's health, you have to convince LPs, your limited partners, to put money into your fund to invest in women's health. And a lot of those LPs don't know what women's health is. They think it's fertility, or they'll think it's menopause, and really raising awareness that it's a huge field, it's underfunded, which means there's a tremendous market potential when you invest in something that is neglected and underappreciated, particularly in a space where, you know, women are the chief medical officers of their family. You know, they make 80% of the investment decisions for their parents, their children, you know, their family. They're deciding where the dollars go. And yet, you know, they've been putting up with bad care themselves. So I think it's time to invest more in women's health and women's health funds and women investors, and across the entire ecosystem. To, you know, this is where I'm so grateful to you, Elizabeth, for shining your microphone, shining your light on this area that most people have never thought of, women's health investment. But you can be deliberate and encourage your companies, encourage whoever you're investing with to look at investing with women's health VCs, look at investing as an angel investor in a women's health company, looking at, if you're an expert in the space, how can you advise a women's health company to help them grow faster? We all can do just a little bit more so that it doesn't take another 30 years to make progress. You know, from 1993 to now, 30 years, this is where we're at since women started getting involved. I don't want to wait another 30 years to see progress. I want to see it in 3 or maybe less. And to do that, we've got to put the money there. And so, you know, this series is really exciting. It also follows, we had the Women's Health Investor Summit at the New York Stock Exchange. It's an annual event where we bring together, as you mentioned in the intro, $100 billion of investors, big investors, government investors, VCs, foundations, pharma companies, anyone that's investing in women's health to help them share deal flow, invest together. You know, we went around the room and all the investors stood up and shared a deal. So, you know, say, I have a company, Series A, they're going to raise this. This is what they're doing. You know, we're investing, we're looking for more investors to come in. And then, you know, this foundation in the corner would say, this fits our thesis, we can put in, you know, 5 million. And this government would raise their hand, say, that fits our thesis, we can invest also. So to start bringing those investors together, and a huge thank to the New York Stock Exchange. The New York Stock Exchange has been such a good champion. Joanna at the New York Stock Exchange has been such a champion for advancing women's health companies and helping them get the exposure and the visibility to have the investment and the growth, because we want more women's health companies listed on the New York Stock Exchange. And following that meeting, McKinsey actually came to the table, and McKinsey's been a great leader in writing about women's health and exposing data and challenges in the space. And they're now doing the first McKinsey women's health investing survey, asking investors to start benchmarking. How much are you thinking about women's health? How much are you investing in women's health? What are you defining the women's health category as? And this will be an incredible report coming out from McKinsey in the spring. You know, the team at McKinsey, Emma and Lucy, they're so dedicated to having a reliable benchmark so we can consistently measure the progress, because right now we don't even have benchmark data. So and then also out of that meeting, we had the first Yale Health of Women Summit, and the Yale Ventures team and the deans of the Yale schools had the first Yale Health of Women Summit, and they essentially brought together the early stage researchers in the Yale ecosystem from the School of Medicine, School of Public Health, School of Engineering, and I'm talking early research. And these are innovations where, you know, brain science, cardiovascular disease, a non-surgical treatment for neural tube defect to close the neural tube so you don't have to do surgery on the mom and the baby while in utero. You know, the interventions for ACL, because women are always tearing their ACLs. You know, across across the board, incredible science that is still early, it's still in laboratories, but Morag hosted this Health of Women Summit at Yale and brought together investors and pharma companies to be exposed to this early research so they could invest and partner and help develop it. So I'm really heartened that if more universities start doing this and focusing on what in our ecosystem is early, but will have tremendous implications for women's health in the future, that is attracting the investors. It is attracting the pharma and biotech companies to say, oh, we can help you develop that new invention or innovation or discovery and help you bring it to millions of women. So it's early days. I'm excited because when I look around, if we don't do it, no one else will. But the more women we pull in, the more women and men are doing it themselves. They're just scheduling the events, bringing the people together, making the investments, supporting the founder, joining the company, and really doing and not talking, which is nice to see.
There's so much to unpack there. I'm so excited to hear this. The way
under the sisterhood.
It's just amazing. But more importantly, I mean, Jess, it's like you're at the center. You know so much of what's going on, and it's like you are so much you're a part of it, and that's got to feel so friggin' good when you think about your career trajectory, your timeline, the way you're living and giving back and bringing to fore. I just have to really say I so admire the work you've done and are doing, and the fact that you speak about it, that you're the thought leader in it, and so you can bring people together and have these conversations. And interestingly, with these conversations, there has to be trust. And so you're building the trust of people, because changing and shifting a market dynamic, whether it's getting, a predominantly male investment community to want to invest in women's health, which, by the way, I do want to point out one thing. All men come from a mother, likely have a sister, might have a wife, might have a daughter. So it's kind of like shocking that they wouldn't just naturally orient to wanting to support their family and these different health dynamics that take.
I think they do. The men have been incredible supporters, but they don't know.
They don't know.
They don't know women haven't been involved in research. They don't know the medicines weren't developed. When they find out, they're as furious as, when they're looking for treatments for their wives and their mothers and their sisters and their daughters, they're just as furious that there's not more available. It is going to take all of us. We focus on the category of women's health because it's new. Men have been in studies a lot longer. We have more data on them, but it is all of us together. You're right.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So this has been an amazing conversation. I don't want it to end, but I want to be
No,
so this is your platform, Jess. I mean, you have many platforms, but it's a really important platform today because you have the ability to give a message to women around the world of all ages, of all backgrounds, of all cultures. What do you say to them?
Oh, speak up. Stop putting up with pain and discomfort. And if you think something could be better or more modern, it probably can. And if you think something's wrong, it probably is. So really speak up and don't tolerate antiquated, subpar healthcare. We have to demand more. And then if you have the time or the energy or the effort, the experience or the interest, support a women's health company in your ecosystem. There is, whether it's ovarian cancer or mental health or osteoporosis or endometriosis, I guarantee there is a women's health company in your ecosystem that would love to have your support, whether it's a small angel check or whether it's helping the marketing team or making introductions. The women's health companies can take all the help and support that is available. So if you can find one in your ecosystem that fits with your expertise area, find a way to help that founder, because it is not easy to start a women's health company, to raise funds for a women's health company, to keep fighting every day to explain why what you do is needed and relevant. So if all of us can help support those women founders and women's health companies that we can touch, we'll get a little more progress faster.
Thanks for listening to Under the Sisterhood. If you haven't already, please give us a quick rating and review on Apple or Spotify. And make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn so you can hear from more amazing women. This podcast is created and hosted by Under the Sisterhood LLC and Elizabeth Elfenbein, produced by Elizabeth Elfenbein and Matt Butler, and edited by Matt Butler. The music is by Ayla Schaefer, her song Rose.